The heat was thick, almost heavy, unusual for late May. The air in the new house felt stale, as if the previous owners had left behind more than just furniture. Emily opened the windows, slipped off her shoes, and sat cross-legged in the middle of the empty living room. Moving from a noisy city apartment to the quiet edges of suburbia had seemed like a great idea, until she found herself truly alone. Someone was working in the yard next door. She glanced out the window. A man, worn grey t-shirt clinging to his back, forearms flexed around a shovel. He moved deliberately, silently. He didn't look up. Not right away, but after a few moments he paused, turned his head, looked directly at her. Not a glance, a look, intentional, focused. Then he turned back to his work. Emily felt a flicker of something she hadn't expected. Curiosity, maybe even intrigue. He wasn't unfriendly, just distant, guarded. The kind of man who didn't reach first, who waited, watched. That kind had always drawn her in. She spent the rest of the day unpacking boxes, wiping down dusty shelves, letting the creak of the floorboards fill the silence. She moved slowly, deliberately, still attuned to the occasional scrape or shift in the neighboring yard. But by sundown, the sound was gone, and the man had vanished. That night, the heat didn't lift. Her sheets stuck to her skin. She took a long, cool shower, towel wrapped loosely around her, windows cracked open to let in whatever breeze might come. And as she leaned into the steam-smeared mirror, brushing damp hair back from her face, something stirred in the darkness outside. A movement, a shadow across the way. She stepped closer to the window, the towel slipping slightly. The house next door was mostly dark, but not entirely. One upstairs window held a dim amber glow. Curtains stirred. A silhouette stood motionless, facing out, watching. Her skin prickled. A quiet tension bloomed low in her belly. Not fear, not exactly. Awareness. A pulse of something unspoken, unconfirmed. She didn't look away. She couldn't. For a few long seconds, the figure didn't move. The window across the yard glowed faintly, like the last ember of a fire. Then the silhouette shifted, just enough to suggest acknowledgement. A small tilt of the head, a step back, and then the curtain fell shut. Emily's breath left her in a quiet rush. She hadn't realized she was holding it. She stayed there a moment longer, towel still damp against her skin, fingertips resting on the windowsill. There was no clear reason for the flutter in her chest, no real explanation for the way her thighs pressed together, almost involuntarily. It had been months since someone looked at her like that. Or maybe it hadn't been a look at all. Maybe she was imagining the whole thing. But still, something lingered. By morning, she half convinced herself it didn't matter. Maybe the neighbor was just a private person. A little awkward. Nothing wrong with that. She told herself she liked quiet people. People who didn't intrude, didn't ask questions. And yet, she found herself watching the yard more closely as she drank her coffee. He wasn't there. The space looked different in daylight. Just an average suburban lawn. Trimmed grass, flower beds near the porch. A narrow path of stones leading toward a shed. Neat, practical. The kind of yard kept by someone who didn't miss things. Someone with order. with purpose. Emily wasn't used to that kind of presence. Most men she'd known were loud, loose, chaotic in some way, demanding space. This man seemed to hold his tightly. Around noon, she caught sight of him again, shirtless this time, dragging a hose across the grass, sweat shining at the line of his shoulder. He didn't look toward her window, not once, but she watched, long enough to feel a slow heat pool in her stomach. That night, sleep came late. She lay in bed in a tank top and cotton shorts, the ceiling fan spinning uselessly above. Somewhere in the dark, a low thump echoed. From next door. Not loud, not urgent, just rhythmic, steady. She strained to hear. Footsteps, or maybe something else. Furniture shifting. A drawer closing. Then, quiet again. Her hand slipped beneath the sheet without thinking, rested on her stomach, then lower. It wasn't just about the sounds. It was the silence between them, the suggestion, the possibility. Her breath quickened as she imagined him. The strength of his hands, the weight of that stare, the slow control in the way he moved. She pictured him standing at his window again, looking back, expression unreadable. Her body arched slightly, knees parting. It had been too long. She hadn't touched anyone since her last breakup, hadn't let herself crave it. But here, in the thick night air, with the sound of him just beyond the wall, it all felt too close, too intimate, like he was already inside her head. She bit her lip to keep quiet, one hand pressing harder, the other clutched at the sheet. It wasn't even about him, not really. It was the idea of him, the mystery, the man who watched but didn't speak, who left just enough space for her mind to fill. When she came, it was sharp and sudden, thighs trembling under the covers, breath caught between a moan and a whisper. And when the stillness returned, she stayed awake, pulse slowing, eyes fixed on the ceiling. Across the yard, the neighbor's light flickered out. The next morning came in a haze of late sunlight and the scent of coffee that Emily had to brew twice before she could think straight. Her sleep had been light, scattered. Her body ached, not from discomfort, but from tension that had nowhere to go, a need not fully spent. She wandered barefoot into the kitchen, letting the mug warm her fingers as she glanced out the window. His yard was empty again. No shovel, no hose, just stillness. Emily didn't expect to see him, really, but disappointment still slipped in, quiet and unwelcome. By mid-afternoon, the weather shifted. A breeze crept in through the window screens, carrying with it the distant hum of suburban life. Lawnmowers, barking dogs, the occasional passing car. But one sound broke through it all that made her stop. Voices, faint, muffled. She turned her head. They were coming from next door. The walls in her house weren't thin, but the back hallway, closest to the shared boundary with his, seemed to collect every subtle vibration. A low murmur floated through, deep and masculine. Then a sharper tone, female, though indistinct. She couldn't make out the words. She shouldn't have cared. But she paused in front of the wall anyway. The cool plaster under her palm, as if it could give her more than sound. The voices rose, dipped, shifted into a cadence she didn't quite recognize. Her breath caught. Was that laughter? No, not quite. A moment later, The pattern changed. Not words anymore. Movement. A thud. Then another. Softer. More deliberate. Her chest tightened. The sounds weren't loud, but they were suggestive. There was a rhythm to them. Something steady. Almost careful. Like bodies shifting against a floor or mattress. Like breath caught and released again. Emily backed away from the wall, pulse quickening. She hated the rush of jealousy that followed, sharp, ridiculous. She didn't know this man. She didn't even know his name. But now, the sounds felt like something being taken away from her, something she'd barely touched, but already wanted. She went outside to breathe. The sun was lower, casting long shadows across the grass. Her feet found the path leading to her own fence line, then lingered there. His curtains were drawn, the porch empty. But his truck was still in the driveway. She stayed there, fingers gripping the warm wood of the fence rail, eyes trained on a space she had no right to watch. When she went back inside, night had already begun to settle. She lit a candle, not for mood, but for the comfort of a flickering presence. Shadows danced on the walls as she sat on the couch with a book she didn't read. Her eyes drifted toward the window more than once. Then came the sound again, not from inside his house, but outside. Soft footsteps across gravel, a door shutting, then silence. She waited, counted her own heartbeat. A knock came, not on her door. On the wooden fence out back, 3 slow taps. Emily stood, her whole body alert. She crossed the room, opened the back door, and stepped outside barefoot. The air was warmer than it had any right to be. The candle's glow spilled faintly through the screen behind her. He stood by the fence. Same grey shirt. Same unreadable gaze. Closer now. She took 2 steps forward, closing some of the distance, though the fence remained between them. "I hope I didn't wake you earlier," he said, voice low, rough, like it hadn't been used in a while. Emily blinked. "No, I was awake." He nodded, eyes still on her, thin walls. "I noticed." There was a long pause. The space between them, though technically filled by fence and dusk, felt charged. Like if either of them moved too quickly, it would break some delicate thread tying the moment together. "You just moved in," he said finally, 3 days ago." He nodded again. "I'm Lucas." "Emily." Another silence. She felt his eyes slide over her, just briefly. From her bare feet to the loose cotton tank clinging to her curves. He didn't stare, but he didn't pretend not to look either. "I don't usually," he began, then stopped. Looked past her for a second. "This isn't something I do." "What isn't?" she asked, her voice softer than she meant it to be. His mouth curved slightly. "Whatever this is." Her skin prickled. She didn't have an answer. She wasn't even sure what she'd come outside hoping for, but she didn't step back. Lucas's hand rested briefly on the top rail of the fence. His fingers tapped once, then went still. He didn't ask to come closer, didn't suggest anything, but Emily could feel it, the weight of everything they weren't saying. She reached up and mirrored him, her fingers brushing the wood just inches from his. "I couldn't sleep last night," she murmured. He exhaled slowly. "Me neither." The air between them shifted, thickened. Neither of them moved. And then, just before she might have said something else, before she could act on the pull in her chest, he stepped back. "I'll see you around," Lucas said, voice quiet. And he walked into the darkness, leaving Emily standing barefoot in the warmth, hand still resting on the fence, heart louder than it should have been. The next morning the air was cooler, and the sky held that soft grey promise of rain. Emily stood in front of the mirror, brushing her hair slowly, watching herself more than her reflection. Her body still held a hum, residual, quiet but present. It was as if something had begun to open inside her and refused to close. She hadn't seen Lucas since their conversation at the fence, and yet she felt his presence everywhere. In the way she lingered at the window, in how she checked her reflection before stepping outside, in the way her thoughts wandered when her fingers skimmed the hem of her shirt. Midday sent her to the local market, a sleepy corner store tucked between a gas station and a laundromat. She didn't expect to see anyone she knew. She barely knew anyone. But as she turned down the aisle with tea and cereal, she saw him. Lucas. He was standing by the freezer case, sleeves rolled, jaw set, eyes scanning rows of frozen meals like they contained state secrets. His hair was still damp at the edges, and his skin had that just showered glow. Emily hesitated, then kept walking. He looked up the moment she passed, as if he'd sensed her. Their eyes met, and for the first time, something in him flickered. Recognition, yes, but also a kind of quiet invitation. She stopped. "Lucas," she said, trying not to sound too breathless. He gave her a nod. "Emily." For a second, that was it. Then something shifted in his expression. A softness that hadn't been there before. He glanced at her cart. "Groceries for one?" "Looks like it," she replied, a smile tugging at her lips. "You?" "Same. I don't cook much." "Maybe you just haven't had the right motivation." That made him pause, one corner of his mouth lifting slightly. "Maybe." She stepped closer. Not too close. Just enough. "About the other night?" She started. He didn't flinch. "I meant what I said. I don't usually talk to people. Neighbors, especially. But you did." "I did." Another silence. Thick and unspoken. "I wasn't trying to listen," she added, voice lower now. "I just heard." He studied her, his eyes lingering. "And what did you think you heard?" Emily hesitated, enough to imagine the rest. That changed something in his gaze. His body didn't move, but the way he looked at her sharpened. Like a line being drawn in sand. "You imagine a lot, don't you?" he asked quietly. She smiled. "Lately, yes." They stood there for a few seconds longer, surrounded by cold air and quiet tension, until someone pushed past them with a muttered apology and broke the moment. Lucas looked away. "See you around, Emily." And he was gone before she could say more. That night, the storm came. It started as a low growl, then built into a steady thrum against the roof. Emily lay in bed with the windows cracked open, rain tapping at the sill like impatient fingers. Thunder rolled somewhere far off, and for a while that was the only sound. Until it wasn't. A floorboard creaked, but not in her house next door. She sat up, bare feet touching the floor, body alert. Another creak. Then, softer, an unmistakable sound. A breath. A low, throaty exhale. Emily's body flushed with recognition. The same rhythm. The same pressure. This time, it wasn't just movement. There were sounds she couldn't mistake. She closed her eyes. Let herself listen. A voice. Deep. Male. A faint gasp. A muffled moan. She pressed her thighs together, heart pounding. The storm raged outside. But her storm was internal now, fierce and growing. She imagined him again. Lucas. The way his hand might grip someone's hip. The sound of his breath near her ear. The weight of his body between her legs. Her fingers found the waistband of her shorts, slipped beneath. This time she didn't stop herself. She moved in time with the sounds, slow at first, then quicker as the tension built. Her skin fevered, her breath catching on each roll of thunder. Her name hadn't left his lips. Not really, but she imagined it did. Imagined him whispering it into her skin. And just when she reached the edge, ready to fall, the sound stopped. Not faded, stopped. She froze, breath shallow. Had he heard her? Could he? The silence rang louder than the storm. Emily lay back, heart thudding in her chest. Her body still thrumming, still open. But her mind was louder now, crowded with too many thoughts. What if he knew? What if he wanted her to hear it? What if it had been for her? She didn't sleep after that. The next morning brought a strange quiet. The storm had passed, but the world still felt wet and raw. She saw him as she stepped onto her porch. Lucas, standing at his mailbox, shirt clinging to his chest from the lingering humidity. He looked up. Their eyes met. Neither of them smiled. But neither of them looked away. It rained again that afternoon, softer this time. A whisper against the windows, like the house was breathing. Emily stayed inside, curled up with a blanket and a mug of tea she never finished. Her thoughts wouldn't settle. Not on her book, not on her phone, only on him. The night before clung to her skin like mist. The sounds, the silence that followed, the look in his eyes this morning. Like he knew everything she'd felt in the dark. She paced more than once, stood at the kitchen window longer than necessary. By evening, restlessness had woven itself into her muscles. She didn't want to wait anymore. At 7, a package was mistakenly delivered to her door. It had Lucas's name on it. She stared at the brown cardboard box, then checked the address again. It was his. No question. Maybe it was an excuse, maybe it didn't matter. She threw on a hoodie over her tank top, changed from shorts into jeans, and slipped out the door before she could talk herself down. The sky was still cloudy, the air thick with moisture. She walked the short path to his front porch and knocked before she could hesitate. Footsteps came quickly. Lucas opened the door, dressed in a black t-shirt and jeans, his hair damp again, like he'd just showered. Or maybe sweat. She couldn't tell. Either way, it sent a ripple through her. "You got my box," he said, looking down at the package in her hands, then back at her. "You got my fence," she replied, offering the box. A slow smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Thanks." He didn't move. Emily shifted her weight, her voice lower now. You going to invite me in? A pause. His eyes flicked over her face, then to the shadowy street behind her. You sure you want to cross that line? She didn't blink. I already have. Lucas stepped back. Then come in. She did. The inside of his home was quiet, sparsely furnished. Dark wood floors, simple furniture, nothing overly decorated. Clean but lived in. His scent lingered. Soap, cedar, something warm underneath. He took the box from her and set it on the counter without opening it. They stood there for a moment, close enough to feel the energy shift. Emily's fingers grazed the hem of her hoodie, toying with it. You're not as closed off as you pretend to be. Lucas leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed. And you're not as careful as you pretend to be. That made her laugh quietly. Touché. You heard me last night. She didn't deny it. I heard you too, he added, his voice like a match being struck in a quiet room. Her stomach tightened. She swallowed. Was it on purpose? He tilted his head slightly. I didn't start it with you in mind. But you finished it that way. Lucas pushed off the counter, closed the space between them, slow and deliberate. His presence wasn't loud, but it filled the room. His hand came up, not touching her, just hovering near her waist. I've thought about this, he murmured, more than once. Emily looked up at him. So have I. He leaned in, his breath brushing her cheek. You want to know what held me back? What? He didn't answer. Not with words. Instead, he kissed her. It wasn't soft. It wasn't shy. It was a kind of hunger that had been stretched too long. His mouth captured hers with heat, with urgency, with restraint, just barely holding back something deeper. Her hands moved instinctively, one sliding to his neck, the other to his chest, fingers finding the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. His hands were firm at her waist, pulling her closer. They stumbled backward, lips never parting, until her back hit the edge of the couch. He pulled away just long enough to look at her. If you want me to stop, I don't. The words came fast, honest. He nodded once, then kissed her again. Slower this time, more intentional, like he was mapping her piece by piece. She felt his fingers slip under her hoodie, trailing along her bare skin, igniting sparks in their wake. When they finally sank onto the couch, it wasn't a fall. It was a surrender. His hands explored her like he'd been imagining the exact shape of her for weeks. Her breath hitched as his lips moved to her neck, then lower, his pace steady, never rushed. He took his time, not because he doubted, but because he knew she needed it drawn out. She needed to feel every moment, and she did. When his hand slipped past the waistband of her jeans, she didn't flinch. She arched into him, breath catching, fingers gripping his shoulders. Her moan was soft, caught between want and disbelief. She was here, with him, on this side of the wall. When it was over, they stayed tangled together. Her head on his chest, the beat of his heart steady beneath her cheek. The storm outside was gone now, and the world had gone quiet again. Lucas's fingers brushed lazy patterns along her back. Neither of them spoke. They didn't have to. Emily didn't stay the night, not because she wanted to leave, But because the silence afterward felt so full, so final, she didn't dare break it with something ordinary, like brushing her teeth or sleeping in a borrowed t-shirt. Instead, she kissed Lucas once more, a soft, grounding thing, then slipped back across the lawn under a hazy moon, barefoot and buzzing. She didn't look back. The next morning, the house felt different. The same walls, the same dusty corners, but something inside her had changed. The boundaries she'd placed around herself, around desire, around vulnerability, had shifted. She moved through this kitchen with bare legs and a cup of lukewarm coffee, still replaying the way his fingers had curled against her skin, the weight of his breath on her neck. She didn't know what it meant. Not yet. But she knew she wanted more. It was late afternoon when she saw him again. Lucas stood in his yard, coiling a thick garden hose around a metal hook. Shirtless again, his back to her. Muscles tight across his shoulders, damp hair clinging to his neck. Emily didn't call out. She didn't wave. But he turned anyway, as if he'd felt her watching. Their eyes met across the fence. He gave a nod, small, almost imperceptible, and went back to his task. She watched him until he disappeared into the shed. Then she exhaled. So that's what this was now. A shared secret. A private gravity. That night, Emily dreamed in pieces. Fingers brushing lips. The creak of a mattress. His voice, low and close. Don't move. When she woke, her thighs were pressed together, body aching in that slow, tender way. The sheets were twisted, her breath shallow. She rolled onto her back, still half dreaming, and let her hand drift down. Not rushed, not greedy. She thought of the way he'd looked at her before touching her. The pause, the control. It wasn't dominance, not exactly, but something else, something steadier. Like he was never in a hurry, because he knew she'd let him have whatever he wanted, eventually. Her hips lifted slightly as her fingers moved in circles, the tension rising like a tide. A sound slipped from her lips, soft and sharp. She didn't try to hold it in. Let him hear. Let him know she still wanted. The next evening, she heard a knock. Not at the door. At the back fence. 3 slow taps. Emily opened the door and stepped outside without hesitation. The air was thick with the smell of grass and something faintly smoky. Maybe someone grilling a few blocks away. The sun was low, painting everything in shades of amber and bronze. Lucas stood on the other side of the fence, forearms resting on the top rail. "You're quiet today," he said. "You didn't exactly knock on my door. Would you have answered?" Every time. That made him smile, slow and real. He didn't speak again right away, just watched her. "You came over," he said finally. "You didn't hesitate." "No," she said, stepping closer. "You?" "I waited." Emily tilted her head. "For what?" "For you to want it as much as I did." She pressed her fingers to the fence. "And now?" His voice lowered. "Now I'm wondering if I should ask for more." Emily's breath caught. "More what?" she asked. Lucas's eyes moved slowly across her face, down her body, then back to her mouth. "Time," he said. "Trust. Skin." The last word was barely more than a whisper, but it hit like a jolt. "Come over," she said, before she could second guess it. He didn't, not right away. He stayed still for another few heartbeats, then stepped back, circled the fence, and joined her in the yard. She opened the back door. Let him in. They didn't speak much that night. Lucas kissed her the way people don't in real life. Like he already knew her responses, like he wanted to draw them out even slower this time. His hands explored her like he was collecting secrets. Her skin warmed under every brush of his fingertips. He stripped her down piece by piece, watching her face the whole time, as if asking permission without ever needing to speak. She gave it, all of it. Their rhythm was different now. No rush, no first-time urgency. It was deeper, more purposeful. His mouth found places he hadn't touched before, and her body welcomed him like it had always known how. She cried out once, louder than she meant to. He didn't stop. He kissed her again and whispered against her throat, "Let them hear." Later, she lay with her head on his chest, fingers tracing the line of his collarbone. He was quiet again, but not distant. Finally, she spoke. "What happens now?" Lucas opened his eyes. "We keep crossing lines." "Until what?" "Until there aren't any left." She looked up at him. "And when that happens?" He leaned down and kissed her forehead. "Then we figure out what's on the other side." Days passed, though Emily couldn't say how many. There were no calendars anymore. Not really. Just sunlight and the shifting feel of the house, and the way her body now moved with quiet knowledge of another's. Lucas didn't stay every night, but he came often enough. Sometimes he knocked, sometimes he didn't. Sometimes he said hi, or "You look tired," or "I was thinking about your mouth all day." But mostly, he said nothing at all, and she didn't need him to. It was in the way he touched her, with both familiarity and reverence. It was in the silence between their breaths, in the pauses he left for her to fill with a gasp, a glance, a trembling hand. She learned his rhythms, how he liked to start slow, but not always, how his teeth grazed when he wanted control, and how his fingers curled when he gave it up. She knew which part of her neck made him pull her closer, and which sound from her lips made his own mouth go quiet. They made love on the floor once, not by plan. It was afternoon. The sun streaked through the windows, warm and golden. She'd said something, nothing, really. Maybe a joke, maybe a comment about the heat. And he'd stepped closer, just close enough to brush her arm with his hand, to see if she'd lean in. She did. The next few seconds unraveled fast. The brush of his knuckles against her jaw, the grip of his hands at her hips, the way he dropped to his knees in front of her like it wasn't even a decision. Her shirt lifted, her shorts pushed down, her breath caught. And then his mouth was on her. No prelude, no slow undressing. Just hunger, clean and hot and deep. The kind that started in his hands and ended in her spine. Her back met the hardwood, and her thighs opened to him like instinct. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. Everything was yes. When she came, her fingers tangled in his hair, her mouth barely forming his name. He kissed the inside of her thigh when she was spent, then rested his cheek against her hip bone like he needed to catch his breath too. That night, they didn't talk about what it meant. They didn't ask for more. They just let it be. One evening, as dusk slid through the windows and painted the walls in violet. Emily stood in front of the mirror, naked, skin still marked in places from his mouth, her own fingers brushing across a faint bruise on her inner thigh. She didn't feel exposed. She felt known. Lucas was in the next room, barefoot, pouring them both something cool and strong. She heard the ice clink, the cupboard close, the low rumble of his voice as he said something to himself under his breath. She smiled. When she joined him, he handed her a glass without a word. Their fingers touched. He kissed her then, but gently this time. Long, slow. The kind of kiss that didn't ask for anything. The kind that simply said, here, still, always. They sank onto the couch, limbs tangled, drinks forgotten. Lucas pressed his forehead to hers and exhaled. You scare me, he said softly. Emily blinked. Why? Because I don't want the silence anymore, he murmured. I liked my quiet before. Now it just feels empty when you're not in it. She leaned into him. Maybe we make a new kind of quiet. He pulled her closer, resting her on his lap, hands firm at her waist. You sure you want to stay here, with someone like me? I moved here for peace, she said. Turns out you were the noise I didn't know I needed. He smiled then. Small, honest. They made love again that night, not with urgency or tension, but with something slower, something closer to awe. Every touch was familiar now, every kiss deeper than the last. He laid her down and undressed her like she was something precious, worshipped her like he'd spent years imagining her skin. When she touched him, she didn't rush. She traced, explored, learned him all over again. She kissed the scars on his chest, let her mouth map the hardness of his jaw, the softness behind his ear. They whispered nothing, said everything. When he entered her, she closed her eyes. When he held her afterward, she didn't speak. They didn't have to. The room was still, but not quiet, not anymore.